Hello everyone, welcome to the section of Object-Oriented Programming through Java. Today's our topic is Constructors, and myself Navya, I am an assistant professor from CSIT department at MLR Institution of Technology. So, in the last session, what we have seen in the last session is what is an array and how many types of arrays and how you are going to write a simple array program and two-dimensional array programs. So, types of arrays in that one-dimensional and two-dimensional array we have seen. In this session, we are going to see what are constructors and what is mean by constructor, how many types of constructors are there, and what is constructor overloading and the differences between a constructor and a normal method. So, what is a constructor? So, we have the concept called constructor in C++. So, what is a constructor basically? Constructor is a method. It is also a method which has some code inside it which is used to initialize the values, variables, or some print. You will have some code inside it. So, whereas what is the difference between a main method and a constructor is constructor will have the same name as class. So, you will have a class same name as method name same as class, and you will have a code inside it. So, here whenever you are creating an object for a particular class, it will invoke the constructor automatically. Okay. So here you can say constructor is a block of code similar to the method. Okay. It is called when an instance of a class is created. When an object is created, it will be called immediately, not implicitly. It will call itself. So, we need not call it explicitly. Okay, at the time of calling constructor, memory of the object is allocated in the memory. So, at the time of calling the constructor only, the object, the variables which are allocated in particular class, that would be allocated as memory. And it is a special type of method which is used to initialize the object. And every time an object is created, the new keyword, at least one constructor is called. So, if you define a constructor or if you did not define a constructor also, it will call automatically, and it calls a default constructors if no constructors available in the class. If you does not define the constructor also, it will call a default constructor. Whenever you are creating a class and when you are creating an object, the constructor will be called automatically. If you did not define the constructor also, what it will call? By default, it will go and it will initialize all the values. Okay. In such case, Java compiler provides default constructor by default. By default, it will create a default constructor. Okay. So, coming to rules for creating a constructor. So, constructor name, this is an important one. Constructor name must be same as a class name. So, whatever you are giving constructor name, that should be same as a class name. Okay. And it should not have any return type. It should not return anything. Okay. And Java constructor cannot be abstract, static, final, and synchronized. It should not, you should not go with abstract, static, final, and synchronized keywords when you are creating a constructor. Okay. So, and one more note point. It is called constructor because it constructs the values at the time of object creation. Why it is called as a constructor? It was saying that it was called as a constructor because it constructs the values. It will initialize the values at the time of object creation. So, it is called as a constructor, and it is not necessary to write a constructor for a class. This is because the Java compiler creates a default constructor to a class does not have any. If you does not define any constructor also, the compiler itself creates a new constructor and it will assign the values for it. Okay, and we can use access modifier. We cannot use the abstract keyword or you cannot return anything but when you are defining a constructor, but you can use the access modifiers here when you are declaring a constructors. So, it controls object creation. In other words, you can say you can have a private, protected, public or default constructors in Java. Okay. So, next is types of constructors. How many types of constructors are there? There are two types of constructors. One is default constructor, and the second one is parameterized constructor. The name itself parameterized, the name itself default. Default constructor is a constructor which does not supply or which does not have any parameters inside it. Whereas parameterized constructor, you will have the parameters inside it. Okay, coming to the default constructor. So a constructor is called as default constructor when it is called as default constructor if it does not have any parameter. If it does not have any parameters, you did not supply any parameters to while calling the constructor, then the constructor is said to be default constructor. And here is the syntax. Simply class name followed by open parenthesis and close parenthesis. In this you will write the code. Okay. See here, the default constructor is used to provide the default values, which is used to initialize the values. So that depend on the type. So if you are having a string as an instance variable, that would be taken as null value. And if you are giving int a, so a value would be 0. Like that, it depends on the type and it will initialize the values in case of default constructor if you did not give. Okay. So rules, if there is no constructor in a class, compiler automatically creates a default constructor and initialize the values. So let us see an example, a small example program of constructors, default constructors. Okay. So import java.lang.star. Okay. So class, I'm going with constructor example. Okay. So my class name is constructor example. Okay. So how you are going to create a constructor? So same constructor example, whatever you has given as a class name, that should be the method name. Okay. So just I want to print something. System.out.println hello, I am a default constructor. So this is how I'm having in a method. Okay. Now public static void main string arguments. Okay. So here I am creating an object for this. Okay. How you are going to create an object? Class name space object C equals to new class name. So here I can say this constructor, this is a constructor call. So whenever you are creating an object to the particular class, the constructor will be automatically called. So it's in constructor. Class name followed by open and close parenthesis is in constructor. Okay. That's it. So I'm closing it. So I have to save. What was my file name? Constructor eg.java is my file name. And I'm saving it. Okay. I'm going to the command prompt to execute it. Okay. Java C space file name dot java. So I don't have any errors. Simply Java space constructor example. See here what I got. I did not call explicitly, just I am created an object to it. So here hello, I am in default constructor. So this is how the constructor will work. Okay. So the second type of constructor is parameterized constructor. What is parameters? If you supply any parameters to the constructor, then the constructor is said to be a parameterized constructor. So a constructor which has specified number of parameters. If you supply any number of parameters, then the constructor is said to be parameterized constructors. Okay. So, the parameterized constructor is used to provide different values to distinct objects. So, whenever you are creating an object, so if I'm creating 3 objects for the particular class, I can supply a number of, so different variables, different values I can provide. So, however, you can provide the same values also, or you can provide different values also for the different objects. Okay. So, let us see a small example of, in this only I can see. Okay. So, I am taking int a. Okay. Here I can say it's in parameterized constructor int a. So, a equals to a, and it's in parameterized constructor. So, I am passing parameters. Okay. So, here I am giving the value of 5. So, when I execute it, I has to compile it again and I has to execute. Okay. Here I have got the parameterized constructor. Now I just want to print the value of a. System.out.println of a. Okay. Static variable. Okay. It should be a static variable, static, so that it can go with everything. So I'm compiling. So when I my a value has initialized for 5. So the default value of a is 5 because I'm providing the value here. So the default value would be 5 here. Okay. Now coming to the next topic called constructor overloading. If I want to supply n number of variables, if I want to have a default constructor and a parameter constructor with 1 parameter and 2 parameters and 3 parameters. So how I can use? So I can go with in one program, I can have n number of constructors together. So that concept is called as constructor overloading. So what is constructor overloading? Constructor, we know it's just as a method, but it won't return anything, and we can overload like Java methods also. So constructor overloading is a technique of having more than one constructor with different parameter lists. So however you supply the parameters accordingly, you will have to have the constructors. So they are arranged in a way that each constructor performs a different task, and they are differentiated by the compiler by number of parameters in a list and their types. So shall we see an example for constructors? So just I want to have the same example. So I want to have a default constructor also. Okay. Constructor example, I am having a default constructor. Okay. Here, what I can do? I can go with a simple message. Okay. default constructor. Okay, this is my default constructor and this is my parameterized constructor. So I'm keeping in the same. Okay, so if I'm creating constructor example A, it's my object, new constructor of, here I'm printing system.out.println of A. Okay, I just want to know if it was a default constructor, what will be the value. Okay, so this is how the method overloading will be there. So constructor name, you can have constructor name is same, but it differs in a number of parameters. So this technique is called as constructor overloading. Okay, now we'll just compile it. Okay, so I have got an error. Sorry, I did not go given constructor EG here. That was my error. EG. Okay. So I have compiled. See here what was the value I have got. I'm a default constructor and value constructor. So it has given some parameters. For this, I'm creating default constructor, and when I'm calling with some value here, it was calling parameterized constructor. This is what a constructor overloading. Based on the parameters, given parameters, it will call a particular method. Okay, so you have to see the differences between a constructor and a method. What is the differences between constructor and a method? Constructor is used to initialize the state of object. The method is used to expose the behavior of the object. Here we will constructor will take the, it is used to only initialize the values, and in the method you are going to have the action or behavior of an object. So actual code, whatever you want to execute, that would be done in Java methods. And constructor must not have the return type. Whereas here it is used to initialize the state of object. Here it's used to expose behavior of an object, and it does not have the return type. It should have a return type, or it might not have the return type, but void or any return type it could have. But here in the constructor, you won't have any return type, and the constructor will be invoked implicitly. Whether if you call or not call at the time of creation of an object, it will call automatically. But method should be called explicitly. You has to call a method, then only that method would be executed. And Java compiler provides a default constructor. If you don't write any constructor, if you does not define any constructor in the program, the Java compiler itself, it will create its own default constructor and it will call it. Okay, in the method, whereas the method is not provided by the compiler in any case. You has to write, the programmer has to write the method by yourself, and the constructor name must be same name as class name. Whatever the name of the class, the constructor name also same. But here the method name may or may not be same as a class name, or you can define with your own name. So this is how the differences between a constructor and a method. So what we have learned in today's session is, first is a constructor. What is a constructor? Constructor is a method which has same name as a class name, which is used to initialize an object. Okay, so next, types of constructors. How many types of constructors are there? There are two types of constructors. One is default constructor, the second one is parameterized constructors. If you don't supply any parameters to the constructor, then the constructor is said to be default constructor. If you are supplying any parameters to the constructor, then the constructor is said to be parameterized constructors. So parameterized constructors, the programmer itself has to define. But default constructor, if you won't define the constructor, default constructor also, the compiler itself creates the default constructor and initialize the values. So this is what the types of constructors. So, one is default and second one is parameterized. So, we have seen the example programs for types of constructor. One is default and one is parameterized. The next concept we have seen is constructor overloading. If you define n number of constructors in a same class, so what they differ? They differ in number of parameters. Then that technique is known as constructor overloading. Okay, we have seen an example program for this also. And the last topic we have seen is differences between a constructor and a method. So, what are the differences we have seen? Constructor is used to just initialize an object, whereas method will give you the behavior of a class. So, behavior of an object. Here, initialize an object, behavior of an object, and it has same name as class name. So, here you can define any name for the method, and it does not have, constructor does not have any return type, but here method you can return the values also. So, these are the differences between a constructor and a method. So, this is what we have seen in today's class. Thank you.